Tonight, we got a great guest on the show. We have Loyd Auerbach, and he's a parapsychologist. And this guy has all kinds of titles. He's a paranormal investigator. He's an author of many books. He's a mentalist. He's even a magician. So, just to start it off real simple, I want to know from Loyd, how did he get involved with the paranormal? What is it about the paranormal that made him gravitate to find the answers? Loyd?
Well, well, I mean, you pretty much said it. It's a mystery. I was a kid, really fascinated by all sorts of psychic experiences and phenomena, from TV, comic books, science fiction, all that stuff. I was also a bit of a science geek as a kid. So when I went to the library, because I'd heard the word parapsychology on Dark Shadows, the TV show, I wanted to know what that was. And I found science books by J.B. Ryan and others who were in the field that were really enlightening to me. So I really got into it. I actually started a parapsychology club with a couple of teachers at my high school in Elmsford, New York, and got to meet New York area parapsychologists growing up. Some of the folks who later on became my colleagues, which was kind of fascinating in itself. And I was fortunate that when I hit grad school timing, there was a graduate parapsychology program here in the Bay Area at the no longer existing John F. Kennedy University. It's now part of National University. But there was a master's program from 1977 to about 87. So I ended up in that. And it was all about the idea, first of all, that people have these experiences. It made no sense to me that mainstream science wasn't looking at them because they're experiences that people have. And there was good evidence for a lot of things. And so there were a lot of mysteries to be solved or to be looked at. And that kind of captured my interest. That and the idea, because of comic books, that we all may be potential to be superheroes in some way.
That's so true. Your father is also too a producer of NBC Sports, so you've sort
Yeah.
of been in the entertainment field for a long time through your parents and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a TV family. My father was when I first was born. My father actually was working on crew for some of the talk shows and some other shows in New York. Then he worked some drama shows. Eventually, worked his way into NBC Sports after working for NBC News in production for the coverage of Mercury and Gemini, the space shots. That's where I got my interest in science. But he ended up at NBC Sports and eventually was the vice president of programming. He left NBC in 1980 and he actually had his own company for many years until his a few years before his death in the early 2000s, where he did things like the international coverage of the Rose Parade and the Rose Bowl, as well as a whole bunch of other sporting events. So I grew up kind of at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. I grew up at 30 Rock.
Wow.
My uncle Larry was a soap opera director for his entire career, um, for the entire run of Love of Life, and then All My Children and One Life to Live. And then my mother's brother happened to be a newscaster for WMCA Radio in New York City, and a bit of a skeptic. So I kind of grew up in the TV, radio world, and my brothers both are in the industry at this point. So, it's I've been in and around television. So doing TV starting in the early 80s was kind of a no-brainer for me in so many ways.
Well, that's amazing.
Amazing.
And there's something I've always wanted to ask you. And I believe I read this somewhere, and if I didn't, and if it's just my imagination, please correct me. But aren't you friends with Chris Chacon of OSIR, the Office of Scientific Investigation and Research? And he also too was the producer of Sci Factor Chronicles of the Paranormal. Am I correct about this?
So Chris actually came to us at JFK when I was on faculty there in the mid 80s. He at the time was working for David Copperfield. So he was a magician himself, and he and I started working together doing investigations, and he actually kind of co-founded the Office of Paranormal Investigations. Um, he went off on his own and somehow ended up with this group of environmental scientists. There was a lot of misinformation put out by Dan Aykroyd about OSIR to get Sci Factor off the ground.
Yeah.
A lot of misinformation. Um, and Chris and and it was really Chris and Peter Ackroyd, Dan's brother, that started Sci-Fi, that did Sci-Factor to start with. Got Dan to actually host it. It was, never really based on anything factual, even though they said it was based on reports in the first season. I did find out from someone who knew the head writer that the report was a 25 word or less description of a report that they got. So, if somebody called and said, "Hey, there are giant alligators in the sewers of Paris," that was a report. They didn't check to see if it was real. They just made some episodes. It was a good show. I mean, from a dramatic sense, but not based on reality. Chris has been doing investigations. He continues in his own work around the world.
I used to watch that show, and I remember there was an episode in which some people were investigating a cave, and they went into the cave, and when they came out of the cave, they have aged considerably.
Yeah, those are sci-fi tropes. There was one episode which had a black hole apparently showing up at a small town, which we wouldn't be here if that was really the case.
Sure did.
Oh, okay.
And it was sci-fi. It's fine. It was up for the sci-fi. It was that kind of thing. And I think there are a lot of shows. I teach a pop culture course actually coming up, starting next month in October, for the Rhine Research Center. And one of the things we look at are these TV shows that are more fictional, more the dramas and the movies, and even going back far to radio and sci-fi novels and things like that, and how all of that stuff has influenced people's popular belief in the paranormal. Literature has done it, comic books has done it a little bit. Actually, comic book fans I love talking to because they seem to be more knowledgeable than almost anybody else that I talk to outside this.
And Lloyd, it's funny that you said that because I used to be in the comic book business. So I was promoting comic book creators by interviewing them and reviewing their comic books. So yeah, I did that for a long time before I got into the paranormal. I met Stan Lee and everything.
Yeah, actually,
Stan Lee's a good guy.
I had a discussion. Stan Lee called. I can say Stan Lee called me when we had our parapsychology program. There was a proposed series that he wanted to start basing on real experiences, and it got canceled before we were able to get it off the ground. But I got to then meet him at WonderCon when it was here in Oakland after that. So I've met a number of people from DC Comics over the years. So that's part of my life that I really enjoy.
Wow, Lloyd, I didn't know that about you.
Who's your favorite character of all time?
Who's your favorite character? My favorite character? God, there are so many good ones. I mean, I guess
top four. Top four.
Say that again.
Top four.
Top four. Okay. Well, definitely Superman. I've got that.
Okay.
It's always been. If I go by the stories in the comics, I've got to say that, believe it or not, I really love the Phantom Stranger.
Oh yeah.
And I do do love the whole mythology of the Green Lantern Corps.
No, pretty extensive.
Actually, I don't have a single favorite in this group, but it's the Justice Society of America, the JSA. The Golden Age guy. Wow. The Golden Age guys. Yeah. I guess I should say.
No Marvel, huh?
Well, I'm not really a Marvel guy. No.
That's all I'm going to ask. Was it? But now DC, yeah. Okay.
It's mainly DC. I've read Marvel comics over the years. Yeah, I'm not really a Marvel guy.
How about Independence? Well,
I mean, honestly, in the last few years, I've kind of resurrected my interest in some of the pulp heroes heavily. So the Dynamite comics with the Shadow have been incredible.
Okay.
I really love that stuff. And the Green Hornet that they've done as well.
Doc Savage.
Doc Savage is another one. I've actually bought some old Shadow pulps. I'm in a couple of Facebook groups dedicated to the Shadow and a couple of others dedicated to pulp magazine groups as well. So a lot of really cool stuff there. And even published in a publication called the Shadow Circle, which is a magazine directed at the Shadow and his history.
Lloyd, I'm gonna tell you a secret, okay? And don't tell nobody. But if you do a search, a Google search, letter hack Wikipedia, you'll find out I was a letter hack. I had numerous letters published in comic books.
Yeah, and there's a woman who I met at the Magic Castle. She was a good friend of mine, good mentalist friend of mine, who actually runs a hoodoo shop up in Sebastopol. Her name is Kat Irandu, and she was one of the major letter writers to DC in the 60s. She has,
Wow.
yeah. So I mean, I met her. It's such an unusual name. I said, "Are you the same Kat who wrote all those letters?" And she said,
Yeah, I've written over. I wrote over 1,000 letters. I'm on the letter hack list. Yeah, and guess who else is on the letter hack list? The guy, the author of Fire and Ice, the Game of Thrones.
"Oh, cool."
Yeah.
Oh, so George R. R. Martin.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
that makes sense. Yeah, there are a lot of science fiction writers who were definitely letter hacks back then.
Lloyd, let's talk Green Lantern. Like, how extensive is that universe? Because when I was little, I just knew the regular Green Lantern and a few
Yeah.
like offshoots, but it started getting like I haven't seen anything like that.
I mean, it comes and goes because they keep on rewriting the current history of the current Green Lanterns are not the same as they were because the Guardians of Oa are gone, and it got very extensive with something like doubling the size of the 3,600 lanterns. But it's got all that mythology that's there. I'm really excited that James Gunn has greenlit this HBO show called Lanterns, which will be a murder mystery with Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan trying to solve a weird mystery on Earth as Green Lanterns. That's going to be in a couple of years. So, it's really the mythology of that it goes back to Doc Smith's Lensman mythology, and the Lensman science fiction books were all about psychic stuff. I mean, they had a lot of psychic stuff in it. I mean, this is where this connection happens to be. There's so much good science fiction. So I've read horror stories as well, but we always think about the ghostly stuff. It all has to do with horror and stuff. There's so much good science fiction that has explored ideas about psychic phenomena, about ghosts, about the afterlife, about all of this that people tend to never think of when they talk about literature that has to do with the paranormal. I mean, one great example is a movie called What Dreams May Come, and the book that came from Richard Matheson. That story, Richard Matheson was one of the most knowledgeable people about parapsychology in the literary field. My friend Barry Taff, whose name you may recognize, knew Matheson really well. Matheson had apparently an incredible library. He actually wrote a nonfiction book about spirit mediumship called Mediums Rare. You can find that on Amazon now. And he wrote the book, the book Hell House, which became the movie The Legend of Hell House. And the book Hell House is based, he's got a real feel for it being, even though it's hard, it feels real. And he wrote a lot of science fiction as well, all of it really kind of connected to our world. There was a movie that came out maybe a week after The Sixth Sense, which is what killed the movie. It just didn't do well at the box office because it was also about somebody seeing ghosts. It's a Kevin Bacon movie called Stir of Echoes.
That was good.
Okay, I remember that.
It's a good movie, but the book is so much better. It's Matheson's book. It's so much better than that.
Book was way better. Okay.
Yeah, but the movie was. I mean, I love that movie. It's a shame that it got knocked out by The Sixth Sense, which is also a great movie, of course.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Okay, Lloyd.
Great information. That was great information. Wow.
You can tell I like talking about
Creature Features, Bob Wilkins? Were you a Creature Features fan? Bob Wilkins back in the day?
No, only because I really didn't discover all of that. I mean, I'm from New York. We had our own horror hosts. So I have met John Stanley a bunch of times, as it happens. So at various conventions. I haven't met Bob Wilkins, but I've kind of rediscovered all that stuff. I just didn't. When I moved out here, I was bartending. So I was bartending when Creature Features was on, and there really wasn't.
Okay.
I didn't have VCRs at that time. So.
Hey, I tell you a funny story. Dennis Richmond was going out with my mother around that time, and the Channel 2 News from Oakland. He'd be in San Francisco, like right over on Octavia and Fillmore, and he'd set the alarm, and then he'd go drive across the bay to Oakland, And the news in those days was at 11:30, and so he'd drive and be on the news, in no time. And I just remember, Mom, that's, and so, but he was a great guy. But yeah, he was Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, back and forth. I grew up in San Francisco.
Yeah, I certainly remember Dennis Richmond from Channel 2 News.
Yeah.
Lloyd, you also too, you did an investigation at 3 locations where I also too did an investigation, and that was the Brookdale Lodge, Moss Beach Distillery, and the USS Hornet. When you did your investigation, what did you find? Did you find anything or?
So first, I want to say the Brookdale Lodge, we investigated a few times. Actually, it was interesting. I think Chris Chacon is the one who put me onto the Brookdale Lodge to begin with.
Oh.
And we talked to a couple of the owners, talked to a number of witnesses, went back there with Annette Martin, who was an incredible psychic medium that I worked with until her passing in 2011. And we found that there was, a lot of evidence of a couple of different kinds of things. There was a little girl's ghost, the little girl who died in the brook back in the 40s or 50s. I can't recall which one it was. So she was there. She was the one that people would report seeing going in and out of the ladies' room, and occasionally, on the dance floor by herself. But then there were a lot of reports over the years of people walking by the closed restaurant of the Brook Room and hearing a huge party inside, like a big band playing and all of that. And they get somebody to unlock the doors, and there'd be nothing in there. That's more of a residual, the haunting thing. So that was definitely really there. And then there was some indication that an older woman, a woman who might have been the little girl's mother might be coming in and out. So it didn't do a lot at the Brookdale Lodge, but it's definitely an interesting place. Moss Beach Distillery, I've been working with them since 1991. That's when I did my initial investigation and continued for many, many years. Haven't been there in a couple of years, but I still talk to them quite a bit. And, the whole story of the Blue Lady, the woman in blue, who changed her clothes after our first visit because we had a medium who told her how to. So it got confusing for a little while because some of the witnesses who worked there were seeing the same woman, but not wearing the traditional blue clothing that had been seen for decades, because the apparition had paid attention to how she could change her clothes. Got a lot of communication with her. We had physical activity that was reported and recorded on occasion. Had some really interesting encounters with her. Got a name for her as well. So we know her as Kate. She's not as active these days, from what I understand, but she has been active for quite some time at the place with a lot of witnesses. And actually, we tracked back the witness testimony. Some of the experiences went back to the early 1930s. I talked to some old timers who are no longer with us, who actually remembered, were around at the time the woman died, and remembered the story and remembered seeing her after her death as well. So that's really an interesting place that I've worked with in a lot of different levels. And then the USS Hornet, actually, I did the initial investigation of the Hornet in '98 before anybody knew publicly it was haunted. I was brought to the ship by a woman named Stash Margaret Murray, who was a psychic who was doing readings for one of the people who was on the board, who actually was working aboard the ship. And the place had just opened as a museum in '98. It had been brought down from Bremerton Shipyards in '95. I have it on good authority from somebody I talked to at the Bremerton Shipyards that the ship did not have any activity when it was in the shipyards, even though he said that one of the other ships did. So it was not like he was a disbeliever. But it started shortly after they moved the ship down to Alameda and started cleaning it up. Talked to some of the primary initial witnesses, and really over 100 witnesses, even before we got to a point where it got any publicity at all. The folks at the ship wanted to know, if I could come up with anything of what was going on, whether this is really happening. And there clearly was good evidence of generally conscious apparitions of sailors and officers. With the rare exception, these guys did not die on that ship. In fact, a couple of them who were identified, including Rear Admiral Jocko Clark, died in civilian life after retirement. He had been a commander aboard the ship in World War II. He did not die in the ship. In fact, he died after the ship was decommissioned. So he was nowhere near the ship when he died. So we find that based on communication from a variety of psychics and some of the witnesses, that these are guys who were there. They came back to the ship after their death to protect the legacy of the ship. The ship was originally scheduled to be scrapped until they brought it down from Bremerton, from Washington, for the closure of the base, just kind of a ceremony. It was an important ship. It's the ship that picked up Apollo 11 and 12. And so there were people who got together and created the foundation that saved the ship, that turned it into a museum. They did not know it was haunted, but the apparitions seemed to kind of add to the ambiance and to protect the history in some respects. And it continues. I mean, there's a lot of activity there today, quite a bit, actually.
Are the apparitions in uniform?
They tend to be most of these folks are in uniform. There are sailors, there are officers, both. There have been occasional people seen in kind of more 1940s clothing, but for the most part, it's just a standard uniform for a non-enlisted man, a non-com officer, and a few of the officers as well that are there. I've written about the Hornet and the distillery extensively in my book, A Paranormal Casebook, which I put out as the second edition this year. So it is available on Amazon.
Just wondering if they
I've heard a lot about. Yeah.
Sorry,
that was the best. No. I'm sorry. My microphone. Lloyd, that was the best information I've heard on the Hornet, because I wasn't really interested when I hear about the tours and like stay there to see if it's haunted, but that was like the best information I've heard on it.
Yeah, no, if you go there, what you want to do is, do one of the tours with one of the docents, but ask for one of the docents who's had experiences, because they're perfectly happy to talk about it, even if it's not a ghost tour.
Okay.
Yeah.
I believe Phil has something to say.
Yeah, Phil.
I was just curious. I've heard like the difference between an intelligent interaction and something that looks like they're seeing a memory, like an imprint or an echo of the past.
Yeah.
Versus something that actually either just trying to communicate or showing signs of intelligence rather than just almost like witnessing a memory type thing. Could you tell us a little bit about that with the Hornet?
Yeah. So we in parapsychology make the distinction between what we call an apparition, which we tend to use the word conscious rather than intelligent. I've had a lot of non-intelligent conversations with people, so I think there's a limit to what we can use for that word. But conscious, the idea is that somebody's consciousness is sticking around after death. We like to use the word apparition, which is an older term, but it doesn't have kind of the baggage that the word ghost does, or even spirit does. And it really relies on, there is that attempt at communication, but it's interaction. So it's really important that there is some indication that there's interaction, that the entity sees you or recognizes that you're there, even if it's just a nod when you are trying to talk to them or something, or just simply waving. There should be some indication of interaction. The majority of experiences people have with figures, with footsteps, with sounds of human beings, of activity, even sometimes with smells, tends to be this imprint of past events or past activity that repeats over and over again. It's like a tape loop. And we, human beings, are psychic, and we pick up this information from the environment. And it doesn't have to have anything to do with anybody who's deceased at all. In fact, dead people don't leave imprints. Ghosts don't leave imprints. Living people leave impressions behind. Sometimes it's just emotional. So you can walk into a house where a couple's been fighting, having knockdown, drag out fights, and you feel the vibes. When you go house hunting, you feel the vibe. That's all a haunting. It's all the same thing. It's all residual. It can be something visual. One of my first really good haunting cases was a couple that had moved into a home that was only a little over 5 years old in an area that was itself, the development, only 6 years old. And they were hearing the sounds of a couple in the next master suite. There are 2 master suites. They're hearing the sounds of a couple in the middle of the night making love loud. and there was nobody in there. And that couple, the one couple who had ever lived in that property, was still alive and in their 20s, and actually confirmed some stuff when I talked to the guy. So it's living people who leave impressions behind, just as living people make movies.
Lloyd, that's incredible, because that's what I call living ghosts. And there was a case in Chicago, Illinois, in which this couple moved into this house. And I've told this story 100 times, so Phil and Zandy might fall asleep. But they moved into this house, and around about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, they would see an apparition of a man walking over to the couch, and an apparition of a woman appears there, and he starts slapping her. And then all of a sudden she vanishes, and they're gone. Well, one day, this guy who lives in the neighborhood, he's the host of this neighborhood block party. And he tells his couple, he says, yeah, we do this every single year. It's a blast. Here's a photo album of our past events. And they're looking through the photo album, and the woman goes, oh my God. She goes, right here in this photo. She goes, those are the ghosts in my house. And the host looks at her and goes, what are you talking about, ghosts? He goes, yeah, they lived in your house. They had domestic disputes. There was police there all the time. They got a divorce. The guy lives 5 miles down the road, and she lives out of state. They're both alive. So they're seeing this impression that you're talking about in the atmosphere, this negative impression, and it replays itself over and over again.
Yeah, emotional events tend to be more impressive. We hear most of the cases we hear about are impressions of negative things, but the reality is sometimes they're positive. Happiness leaves impressions behind too.
That is true.
People rarely ever report them. I think the only reason that couple called us about the sounds that they were hearing is they were annoying them at night. Otherwise it was apparently later on when they realized, when we figured out what it was, they were okay with the sounds. Apparently it kind of helped boost their love life somehow.
And Lloyd, and you're talking about happy sounds, okay? Yeah. Positivity in the atmosphere. And that happened in one of my investigations at the Evangeline's costume shop.
I know the place.
The third floor used to be Deal Mills, which was a nightclub back in the 70s. And some of the employees who worked late in that shop, sometimes they hear the shuffling of feet, they hear laughter, they even hear disco music off in the background. Happy sounds, because there was so much positive energy thrown into the atmosphere.
That's like the big band party that people hear at the Brookdale Lodge from outside the room. It's the same.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's the environment holds information. We pick it up. This is why there is a correlation in a lot of work that people have done that shows that EMF meters or sensors pick up an unusual electromagnetic fluctuation in those haunted spots. Very little did with ghosts, by the way, but with the hauntings, the residual stuff, there seems to be a correlation there to the environment. So there's something about that.
Lloyd, I want to also ask you, some of the ghost hunting groups, even with my ghost hunting group, sometimes they come with their little Connect and they get those stick figures. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, they're useless. And it's because, if you read articles about the Xbox Connect in general, you'll find that the Xbox Connect will recognize occasionally chairs and sofas and even a fern on a table as a human being. I mean, shapes it's not intelligent in that sense. And there's no evidence whatsoever that combination of LiDAR and infrared will pick up an entity, an apparition, because they're not giving off anything. They're not reflecting anything. We can't really, if you have a picture of a ghost, if you ever could get one, it has nothing to do with what the camera's seeing. It has to do with the entity affecting the device itself. kind of like Ted Sirios, who was a bellman who was a drunk, was able to cause images to appear on Polaroid film back in the 60s under controlled conditions. It's called psychokinesis. It's mind over matter. So we don't see a ghost as optical phenomena. We pick it up and we see things because that's perception. That's not actually our eyes picking it up. It's our perception picking it up and making it visual for us. But otherwise, those things, they don't have any scientific validity. But the guy who developed them sells a lot. I had a talk with someone the other day from the New York Times Wirecutter. They're going to be doing a story on ghost tech. And the fact is, things like the REM pod, which goes for close to $200, I think. It's like a $20, $25 theremin kit inside a housing that probably costs more than the guts inside for that. So why not get a theremin? I mean, if you're going to spend that kind of money, get a good theremin. It's a good musical instrument. You can not only use it for ghost hunting, you could use it for learning to play music.
I love it. I love it. Okay. You totally are the same wavelength as me. Yeah, that Connect stuff, I just think is a bunch of BS.
Yeah. You for any technology, because no one's been able to figure out what technology could detect something we don't know what it's made out of, right, or what it's radiating. The most important thing is need a human being having an experience, number one, before you should even investigate. And then you need a human being, preferably, to have an experience while there's an anomaly on the equipment. So, for example, my group did a TV pilot, which was almost sold 3 or 4 times, right around the time of the X-Files, which the producer and I have been talking about getting it, putting it out on the web, just redoing it, just editing some more stuff in there. But we were working also with Japanese TV, and we had a Japanese medium. The Japanese crew, this is 1993, they rented all sorts of equipment for us, scientific, environmental sensing stuff. We were in a place that had a lot of activity, a lot of good witnesses. And the Japanese medium, at one point, Mrs. Gibo, starts talking to this little girl's ghost. And every single piece of equipment that we had, including some of the thermal vision stuff, was picking up weird stuff. Everything was going off while this was all happening for her. In fact, her blood flow on her body changed. We could see that on the thermal vision, where she was saying the little girl's holding her hand and her thumb especially. It got much hotter. And that can be because of belief. But every piece of equipment we had went off. We had a geomagnetic sensing station for the Earth's magnetic field. That went screwy. We had several different types of EMF sensors. We had temperature sensors, and it wasn't changing temperature in the room, but these things were going nuts. So we had everything going off when she was having this experience, and that tells us that something legitimate was happening that at least caused her to think she was talking to a ghost, but was possibly caused by some entity or apparition at that point. In fact, I took the data to an environmental scientist and asked him what he thought of, what else could cause all of these things, including a Geiger counter going off at the same time. And very, very deadpan, he looks at me, he says, a nuclear explosion.
Whoa.
And then he said, but I think because you're not dead, probably wasn't that.
I think the theremin's an interesting idea of because like you said, it's an instrument you play without actually touching anything.
Because it's using your electromagnetic field to affect it.
So if you had a theremin on a stick, that was small enough and light enough to put on a stick and put it like far out in front of you, almost like a metal detector.
Well, that's kind of what the REM pod has little antenna for that. But that cheapo thing that's in that is not very good. In fact, it's too sensitive. The guy I was talking to on Friday said that he leaves it on all night, all day in his house, and it keeps going off. And he knows his house isn't haunted because there are fluctuations in the electromagnetic field generally everywhere. So
it could be a fly, right? I mean,
it could be a fly. Yeah, exactly. It could be anything at that point. So the musical instruments are much more are set up in a way that they're not going to pick up anything unless something gets really close and kind of interacts with it. They're just a box with an antenna. I mean, they don't look like much. But
I watched a documentary on. I watched a documentary on that. Steve Martin made a documentary about Leo theremin.
Oh, did he? Okay. That's
great documentary. The guy also invented the first bug, the first listening device. And the KGB actually kidnapped him from America, brought him back to Russia, and kept him hostage until the fall of the Soviet Union. He also invented a version of television before there was television, and so like all that stuff. The guy was a genius.
Yeah, there were a number of people who actually developed things well before like Philo Farnsworth for television and things like that.
Well, that
Tesla had all sorts of inventions which we take for granted today, but he got the short end of that stick, certainly.
Yeah, certainly changed the world with alternating current.
Yeah, no question. Yeah.
Well, that
Sorry, Paul. We lost Zandine, but I guess we'll keep on watching.
Also, too, I wanted to ask Loyd. I know you have the inside scoop. When I was a little boy, I used to watch One Step Beyond.
Yeah.
Were those stories true, or?
The vast majority of those were based on reports that were sent into Duke University's parapsychology lab, the American Society for Psychical Research, and it might have been from the British Society too. Or they were pulling from books that had collected some of those reports as well. And then he did, John Newland, who is the host and producer or director, he did one episode, which is one I show my students. Actually, it's free on YouTube, and you can also get it at the Internet Archive. It's called The Sacred Mushroom, and it's a documentary episode. In fact, he goes down to Mexico, to the hills of Mexico, and goes to basically a hallucinogenic mushroom ceremony with a brujo, a sorcerer type, and they kind of have experiences there. Andrew Puharich, who was someone who was connected to parapsychology, actually wrote the book The Sacred Mushroom, but he also did a lot of work on telepathy as well. And halfway through the show, Newland goes to Puharich's house, and I think it was in California at that point, and actually does an ESP test, and then Puharich gives him a little bit of the mushroom because it wasn't illegal at that time, and tests him again, and he does much, much better. And there's some humorous stuff that happens in between. So there were a couple other really, really interesting episodes that were very, very well documented. So there was quite a bit that was, it seems like the Twilight Zone. Most people don't know that there was a year of One Step Beyond before the Twilight Zone premiered. So in some respects, when people compare the two and they say, well, it was a knockoff of the Twilight Zone, I'd say it was kind of the other way around in some respects.
Interesting. I gotta tell you, when I did the Moss Beach distillery, when we went outside to investigate, two of my investigators kept on telling me that they were seeing fairies flying around. Okay, I'm gonna tell you, Loyd, I didn't see it, but they actually produced 3 photos which looks like fairies. It looks like little humans with these dragonfly wings. And I tried to get the information out on the internet and everything else, but the person who took the photos, I guess he thought he was going to make $1 million from his photos, and he wouldn't release it to me. But that was really odd. Did you experience anything like that?
There's nothing like that. The closest that comes is when it was misty outside and somebody taking photos at night was getting, unusual shapes because of the reflection off the water droplets.
Well, there was a case like that like 100 years ago.
That was Nottingham fairies from Arthur Conan Doyle got taken in by that whole thing.
Oh yeah.
The thing that really kind of caused that to be absolutely shown to be a hoax was the fact that the fairies that were taken in that picture, somebody tracked down the magazine that they were cut out of.
Oh
yeah. And what's your thoughts on out of body experiences that people have?
Well, I mean, basically, there's been research on that subject going back over 100 years. Charles Tork did some controlled experiments in the 1960s at the American Society for Psychical Research, where I worked for about a year and a half in the early 80s. Carlos Osis and Donald McCormick were doing extensive research with a man named Alex Tanis, who could do out-of-body pretty much at will. And it was a very complicated experiment. Actually, there's a video on YouTube. If folks just simply go to YouTube and put in ASPR OBE experiment, was the 1983 video, and it's an extended video taken from footage shot by a news crew, and you might even catch sight of me kind of flickering in and out. But it really covers the experiment itself, and there's some really good evidence from laboratory work about this. But of course, there's so many experiences that have been reported both with near-death experiences and also without near-death experiences. One of the more interesting people who could do out-of-body was a guy named Ingo Swann, who not only could do out-of-body work, but he also was kind of the guy who developed the method for remote viewing for Targ Puthoff early on for the early military program. Swann wrote a book in 1976. Came out in 75, excuse me, came out in 1975. If you can find it, it's a really fascinating read. It's called To Kiss Earth Goodbye. In that, he decides to go out of body and go traveling beyond the range of the Earth. He goes to Jupiter. He goes to Saturn. He describes features of the two planets, which when people in the science of the planetary sciences read that, said, oh, that's BS. It's not. And then Voyager got there and confirmed everything that Swann stated.
Wow.
So Swann felt he left his body to do that, but of course he could also do remote viewing. So there's always a question of, is somebody doing remote viewing, or are they going out of body? We have many cases where people go out of body or have an out of body experience, and they are seen by someone they go visit when they're out of body. And those kinds of cases, often called bilocation, are on the books. And those are really interesting cases as well. Those are cases we call apparitions of the living as well.
What do you think of Ed Dames' work?
James was connected to Stargate a little bit. I happen to be the co-author of a book on the history of the U.S. and Soviet programs. The main author is Ed May, who was the director from late 1985 through 1995 of the project. And, you know, Dames has his ideas, but his ideas don't fit with actually the best successes of the project of Stargate. You know, he was connected. People like David Morehouse was there for a few months. That was it. He has really built his whole career on having been a Stargate remote viewer, but honestly, he wasn't there very long, which should tell you something. There are other people who were there a lot longer, like Joe McMoneagle and Lynn Buchanan and Paul Smith. Those are the people I'd point to as really, especially McMoneagle was the #1 viewer. He actually got a Legion of Merit award from the government, from the Army, for his remote viewing work.
McMoneagle, I have to check him out.
McMoneagle, yeah. Yeah, he, you know, for $4.99, you can learn how to do remote viewing from his remote viewing secrets book. It's that's what the price. Really? The price of the Kindle book is $4.99. You don't have to take a $3,000 course.
It's a bargain.
Yeah. So our book, I'll just let you know, our book is called ESP Wars East and West, and it's the only one about that project that also covers the Russian side. We actually had contributions from the Russians who were involved in their project, their program.
So the Men Who Stare at Goats, was that based on you guys then?
No, actually, Men Who Stare at Goats was actually a separate group of Army officers. I think John Alexander was one of the leaders of that. And they had this idea that maybe it was partly because they heard about this martial artist who we had done research with, as had many of my colleagues, who could do some pretty incredible things with psychokinesis and his kung fu. So they had this idea that maybe they could learn these things and be real Jedi in some respects. And they actually got Guy Savelli, was the name of the martial artist. They brought him in, had him teach them some techniques. He actually went on to teach other Army Rangers and other folks certain techniques of how to take a blow so you wouldn't feel it, kind of deflecting a blow, kind of a shielding technique, which he said, what Guy had told me, and I've seen some video of these guys. You know, you see a guy getting hit in the chest with a a metal pipe, and a pipe slightly bends around his chest, and he's fine. So things like that, which were very possible. The thing that most people don't know, I was still in contact with Guy when he started working with these people, and they wanted to learn a technique called the dim mak. And the dim mak.
Such a this.
Is that real? Is that real?
Is that a real? They want to know, is it a real thing? And it's apparently a real thing. Guy demonstrated that on a goat. He did the death touch. In fact, he sent me photos of the autopsy of the goat, which frankly were kind of gross because the organs of the goat were ruptured at that point. So when the book came out, I did connect with the guy a little bit, and he told me that it probably should have really been called The Men Who Touch the Goats, not The Men Who Stare at Goats. But that would have been a very different movie, wouldn't it?
So it's that I've heard it back in the day. People used to talk about ki and chi and hitting somebody without actually touching them, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, my dad, as part of his work at NBC, did cover a number of martial arts tournaments, and they had some really interesting footage. There was a film which you can find people talking about. I actually got to see it. God knows where it is at this point, but it was shot at 1,000 frames per second of a karate master breaking some, can't remember if it was bricks or concrete block, and you see the block actually starting to break before his hand actually touches it.
Well, whoa.
And what's really interesting is some of the skeptics knew about it, and the explanation was that his hand was moving so fast that he caused a compression wave, and the air broke the brick. That's completely debunked by physics. That's not possible. I mean, if you were the Flash, you could do that, or Quicksilver. So depending on Marvel or DC.
So even if it was that, that's still impressive as hell.
But either way, the idea is, the idea of chi doing those kinds of things. Guy Savelli was able to throw chi from across a room, and actually, even though there was nothing visible, the photoelectric beam, it registered that something had broken the beam.
Yeah. Well, Lloyd, what about those guys they have on YouTube? Like, they have this guy, he was like, I guess 80 something, and he had the Aikido style, and he had something where he would just touch him and electrocute him, but when he fought somebody, it didn't work. And I don't know if he didn't have a chance to channel it. And I also want to ask you, what do you think about Jack Parsons and channeling like those entities and that type of energy? Do you believe that was real? Do you think that was, just hocus pocus? Was there any real research to that?
Not from our side, our field. The thing is, a lot of mystical stuff was clothing for potential psychic things. I mean, you have a lot of mystical, a lot of practices that may kind of spur on some psychic stuff, but it's really, but a lot of what Parsons was doing, some of those other from the occult side, was all window dressing. I mean, it was just, fun. Okay. It's kind of like Anton LaVey started the First Church of Satan in San Francisco.
Right.
And most people don't know that LaVey grew up in the circus.
That makes sense.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a colleague of mine, one of my mentors, Marcello Truzzi, grew up in the circus with LaVey. LaVey rescued circus animals from being destroyed. I mean, he was kind of very much an animal person. And what I know about him is the whole satanic thing that he started, it was kind of like they didn't do any rituals the way he wrote the Satanic Bible, but there's nothing about, it's not about sacrifice, except they were worshiping money. Money's the root of all evil, so let's worship money. And so it was all about material gain and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, which is why a lot of people were drawn to it, apparently.
I heard it was an excuse to have orgies.
Yeah. Might have had that. That's, sex energy is not bad energy.
Well, they got John Mansfield involved. So, I mean, that was a score for him.
I did an investigation at the Round Room in Grass Valley, and they kind of say that Anton LaVey used to take his cult members to this location for satanic rituals. I learned doing some research, Anton LaVey never even went there, but they do have all kinds of satanic writing around the Round Room, and I did find a human tooth in the Round Room. So it was like I don't know what they're doing over there, or
Well,
why
there,
they
there
were able
are
to,
people.
but it's kind
There
of
are people
creepy.
who are not. Who are there are people out there who try all sorts of things. Who are either themselves mentally deranged in some way, or are trying to control other people, or just like hurting. Doing horrible things to people. We know that. The whole satanic thing. The idea of Satanism came up as anti-Christianity, and it's the satanic temple that we hear about on the internet these days, of course, is a First Amendment rights organization that uses the idea of them having a religion to fight off, or to say, well, if you're saying you can have this in the church, in the parking lot of City Hall, you have to have a statue of Baphomet because that's our religion, even though they may not even believe in the devil at all. So it's really I think it's a really good political ploy from that perspective, but is it really trying to do anything? But there are people who believe in, let's face it, there are people who believe in demons. There are people who believe in the devil. That's part of the work of, or the beliefs of various peoples around the world. So it can be a legitimate belief, and they might legitimately believe that if they do these horrible things, they'll get something out of it, besides a prison sentence. So
there was the satanic panic that happened in the 80s, and then was that late 70s, early 80s. There was a documentary about a woman who, under hypnosis, was like recalled all this satanic sexual abuse that supposedly happened to her as a child, and then she ended up marrying the doctor that had her under the hypnosis. The whole thing, it's
the problem with that's actually triggered the whole false memory syndrome idea. That came from that.
People went to jail over that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, they certainly did. Yeah, and there's so little evidence of the widespread anything there. But the problem with hypnosis is, and I saw an example of this, is that there are people, who, when you are hypnotizing someone, your beliefs and the questions you ask or the suggestions you make, because hypnosis is cooperative, the person will come up with stuff to fill that in. So if you have any idea or want to find out if you've been, for example, abducted by aliens, and you go to a hypnotist or hypnotherapist who specializes in that, the odds are that you will have been abducted by aliens, because of the way everything is being phrased and your initial suggestion that you were, even if you have nothing. We had someone speaking for a local group in Berkeley years ago who was actually a fairly well-known UFO expert. He started a hypnotherapy practice to make money, to kind of support himself. And after talking about UFOs and such, and talking a little bit about some of the better abduction cases, then he starts talking about the signs of alien abduction. And if you've experienced these things, then you might want to talk to me about getting an appointment, and I can regress you and see if you've been abducted. And the things he covered fit just about everybody, including missing time at night. I don't know, after I fall asleep, I have several hours of missing time. It really, hearing a high-pitched tone once in a while, that's the aliens communicating with you. That happens for physiological reasons and air pressure reasons. So he started listing a bunch of things that caused a whole line of people to line up with him, and almost guaranteed every single one of them was going to end up having been an abductee. So there are some serious problems with the satanic panic, with all of that, that are similar.
Lines that are
what have been the most compelling to you, Roy?
Sorry, Phil?
Zandy. Sorry, Zandy.
Oh no, I'm sorry, Phil. No, go ahead, Phil. I'm sorry.
We were talking about the idea of I forget the term you used, the false memory syndrome.
False memory syndrome, yeah.
Oh yeah.
What about Barney and Betty Hill? Do you think that could be a case of that, or do you think there's some?
It doesn't seem to be that one, and there are a couple others that don't seem to be, for a number of reasons. One of which was, firstly, at the time, the idea that alien abductions were even happening in the early 60s was, the person who hypnotized them would not even been trying to find out if they saw a UFO, let alone he was just trying to find out what happened to them. So regressing them back in time, but not giving them any suggestions as to what happened. The two guys from Pascagoula, Mississippi, if you remember that case.
Yeah.
the older guy and the younger guy. Jalen Hynek was involved in that. Actually, he was the head of the astronomy department at Northwestern when I was there. So I actually volunteered at the Center for UFO Studies. But the thing that I remember most about that case, it had physical evidence. So that case had physical evidence. So there was some alteration of the plant and the plants, an impression of something. There had been analysis of that. There was some unusual radioactivity. There was all sorts of things that went on there. And they were hypnotized. Now, they were already predisposed to thinking they were abducted by aliens because they were conscious. So one of the things Hynek said he did, first of all, they went under polygraphs. And basically, it ended up him saying, look, we have physical evidence of this. We have other people who saw the UFO. Whatever happened with them, they firmly believe this. This is their reality. He even said, I got the older guy drunk at a party, and his line was for the Tonight Show. The line was, his story held up, but he didn't. So, it's hard to know. One thing that Hynek was absolutely certain of, the sheer volume of people who claimed or believed that they were abducted by aliens is way bigger than could be possible in, let's say, an urban environment, for example. So, and for the most part, it seems to be Americans, which is really bizarre too. So it's kind of an American thing.
That is interesting. I never thought about that before. Zadine, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh, no, not at all. That's so interesting. I was going to ask Lloyd, like, for you, what's the most compelling UFO, alien, abduction, or like Preston Dennon? I've listened to some of his stories, and he has where there's like 4 or 5 witnesses, lawyers and different people. I'm wondering whose research do you think is compelling, and what has been the most compelling research of your own personal archives?
Well, honestly, UFOs are not my area. So
okay.
I only know a little bit because I did go to school at Northwestern. I did volunteer for a year at the center. I had some interest in that.
That's fair.
Yeah. But, the thing is that, so back in the 90s, I worked with a guy. I got to know a man and work with him, and he became kind of a mentor. We worked on psychokinesis, mind over matter stuff. His name was Martin Caidin. And Martin Caidin was, among other things, a science and science fiction writer. He wrote the book Cyborg, which became the $6 Million Man. He was actually kind of an advisor to the series. He helped kind of shape the Bionic Woman. He wrote a book called Marooned, which was published before Apollo 13 and kind of predicted some of the stuff for Apollo 13 and was made into a movie in 1968. He was a consultant to NASA, former Army intelligence, and he was very much interested in UFOs. And he went looking, when he was in military intelligence, he went looking to see what he could find on the UFO issue. And there were some rich, interesting stories of encounters, including encounters possibly with ETs from other people in the military that he ran across. And he talked to these guys as well.
Okay.
So there was that. But one thing he said at the very end of everything was that what the cover-up was for the government was very simple. And I'd heard this from somebody else as well who had been connected to the military. The Pentagon knows more than they're saying. What they know is there's something flying around in our atmosphere, and we have no idea who it is, why they're here, and where they're from, and we can't shoot them down. So because we don't know anything, we're going to pretend we know something, and it's better that the public believes we're covering something up and that we're in control than we don't know what the hell we're doing.
Well,
that's
see, now when you say that, like all these programs and like Gaia, or they have some guy said he was in the room with the alien and he talked to a level 6 being, and there was these programs that, you hear stuff like that. And I'm wondering, somebody like you that, has taken time to study, graduate, studies, what do you think about those type of shows and things when they say that type of stuff?
I'm pretty sure, it's like people with extreme psychic or ghostly experiences that don't fit, that are not even commonsensical. There may be one person who has had, or a couple people who've had that kind of experience, but it doesn't make any sense. I mean, there were people for a while, and we still occasionally hear about reptilian aliens, and the government, the whole thing with the government. And
Yeah.
the first time I started hearing about that, I was a little surprised. I ended up talking to an older psychic. The guy was kind of on the decline, and he was he was convinced that they were reptilian aliens. He starts describing all the stuff, and I said, Fred, that is the plot of the TV show created by Ken Johnson called V.
Yeah.
It was exactly that plot. And he said,
Wow.
See, Ken Johnson knows the answer to that. And people have accused Steven Spielberg of knowing the real story. They've accused George Lucas of knowing the real story. The fact is that science fiction writers have been describing this stuff for a long, long time. It has nothing to do with actual aliens or anything like that. We speculate, we play with this, and sooner or later something's going to be true. But when people, it's kind of like the channeling stuff. You got to take everything with a huge block of salt, not just a grain of salt.
The channeling. Oh.
Have you ever read Arthur C. Clarke?
I have read Arthur. Well, it depends on which one, but
Childhood's End.
Oh yeah, absolutely read Childhood's End. Yeah,
where the aliens end up looking like devils,
right?
And that's why they wouldn't let us see them for 50 years. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, I think there is an element to that if they look so different from us, if anybody is visiting and they look so different from us, it makes sense that they wouldn't show us for fear of freaking us out. And Hynek had an argument, kind of debate running with Carl Sagan back in the 70s. Sagan would say that there's no way that they're extraterrestrials coming here because the physics doesn't allow them to go faster than light. And why would they take, even if they went close to light speed, the subjective time aboard their ship would be months, if not years. It would take years to get here, but subjective time, because of time dilation, would still be months. Why would they take all that time to come here? And Hynek at one point pointed out, well, anthropologists used to take months to cross an ocean or go into the jungles to study a primitive culture. Well, maybe that's what they're doing. Maybe they're studying a primitive culture. And then he pointed out the idea that we can't say that our physics is complete, because it's not. In fact, we see people working on creating warp engines these days and trying to do faster than light stuff like Star Trek. And the other thing Hynek pointed out, again from anthropology, and I was an anthropology major, is that a good anthropologist who discovers, let's say, an unknown tribe in the Amazon, if he wants to make contact, is going to observe from a distance for quite a while, and preferably not let them see him. And then eventually if he wants to make contact, might let them occasionally take a glimpse, and eventually get used to him being around, and then approach them. So he said, if you want to go by UFO experiences, isn't that what we're seeing right now? So even though he wasn't necessarily saying that was happening that way, he said it kind of makes sense if that's what they were doing.
Makes absolute sense.
Hey, Lloyd, I actually talked to J. Allen Hynek on the phone in 1976. My girlfriend at the time, her name was Helen Lang, and she came screaming into the apartment, and she goes, there was a UFO 200 feet above my head. And I just thought she was making up a story. And I said, okay, if it's really true, Helen, I said, I'll drive you down to the sheriff's office and you can make a report. She goes, okay, let's go. So I took her down. This is in Sacramento. And the police gave her an 800 number. And she...
Center for UFO studies. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I get a phone call. I break up with Helen, and I get a phone call. It's from J. Allen Hynek, and he says, hey, so did you see the UFO? I go, no. He goes, is Helen around? I said, I broke up with her. I said, I don't have her phone number, nothing. And he goes, did she draw a picture of the UFO? I go, yeah, she did. And he goes, can you send that to me? And I said, okay, I'll send it to you. He goes, what were you doing at the time when she saw the UFO? I said, I was watching TV. I was watching Dick Van Dyke's The Comic. And he goes, what was happening? And I said, well, the TV went on a blink. There was a lot of static. And he goes, that's what happens. And I didn't know much about UFOs during that time. Mm-hmm. And he goes, that's what happens when UFOs are close by. radios go on static, TV goes on static, engines and cars they get stalled.
Yeah.
And so anyway, come to find out, in the Sacramento Bee, the newspaper, two other people saw the same UFO. It was three different people in three different places in Sacramento that saw the UFO. So Helen Lane wasn't lying. And I'm frustrated because I didn't go out there in time to see the UFO. But yeah.
And you broke up with her, Paul. How could you?
Yeah, how could you? Yeah. That's when I was in college. So actually, Heine could have talked about that in one of the lectures he did.
That
too.
is amazing. What a small world. A small world. Yeah. Oh, and I just got to say, going back to the USS Hornet, one of my investigators at the time, Carolyn Ann Castro, and Phil, you probably remember her because she was on one of our shows back in the. She's a witch, and
Oh, okay. She's on
yeah,
the sanitarium.
she showed me a video, and it looked like an apparition was moving across the film, and this was in the USS Hornet. When I looked at it, I go, that does look like an apparition. I said, you ought to contact My Ghost Story and submit that video to her. And My Ghost Story also too, they showed it, and when I was there, I didn't get any EVPs or anything. So
EVP is pretty uncommon at the Hornet. They're a little bit more. It's a little different. Their communication with people. But there are a number of docents who have had experiences even while in the daytime tours. There was one of the docents has told me that there's an area they opened up. Probably they didn't open up these conference rooms until about 2010. But they've been still cleaning the ship so that every part of it can be visited. But it's taken a while for a number of environmental reasons. And there was a conference room for the captain of the ship and any visiting admirals. And one of them told me that when they occasionally on the daytime tours, he'd open the compartment door to the conference room, which they knew normally would walk through, and he'd see a bunch of officers sitting at the table, even though there's nobody on the ship from the Navy. And he'd have to back out and tell everybody, well, we have to go around. They're having a meeting. And this would happen every so often. And we've had some similar things happening like that in our investigations over the years as well, where there are places that, you normally would go into and you walk in, it's like, oh, we can't be here right now. Somebody's like, and if we have a psychic with us, she'll look at it and say, oh, yeah, they're having a meeting. They don't want you in here right now. Yeah.
The officer's mess.
Lloyd, why don't they have you on more shows? I mean, like a guy that really has cross-referenced, you've read a lot of stuff, a lot of, I mean, why wouldn't they have somebody to make the team tight like that?
Zandine, he's actually in a lot of shows.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. I've been on a lot of shows, but usually not most of the reality shows.
I mean, the league. You should be the.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I've worked with producers who have had requests from networks to create a show that's a little different than the typical stuff you see. A slightly different approach. I worked with a producer. We had an incredible, very different approach, which would have been high tech, environmental, more. We actually had Panasonic was going to build equipment for us for stuff. And
okay,
when we pitched it, they said, this is not. Then they said, this is not enough like the other shows. We're going to go with this other group production company that's doing something just like Ghost Hunters. We know that'll get ratings. So that's the idea. And this has happened multiple times. Most of those shows do not want parapsychologists on them because we will, number one, tell everybody, investigating in the dark makes no sense, 0 sense, except from a television production perspective to make things look spooky. That is the only reason to investigate in the dark with night shot camera. There is no data that says that ghosts are more active with the lights out, because the majority of experiences human beings have had over the centuries have been during the day or when some kind of light was on at night, whether it's candlelight, gaslight, electric light, or something else like that. People don't suddenly, people are normally not awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. unless they're happening to be old enough to get up to pee every night at that time.
Yeah.
But it's television. It's television.
Right.
TV's visual.
Reality is not reality.
It's not reality. Yeah, it's not that. And I've gotten cut out of 2 shows over the years. One was Unsolved Mysteries episode back in the 80s because I refused to say what the director wanted the episode to say, which was contradictory to what the people who were experiencing things were saying. He wanted to turn it into a demon thing, and the people were like, "What are you talking about?" So it ended up I got cut out of the segment because I wouldn't say what he wanted me to, and then they edited it in such a way and brought in a local pastor who said, "Oh, there's hellfire, demons and the devil's here and all that." And he had nothing to do with the case at all. So it's television. I mean, again, growing up
somebody to say that line.
Yeah, growing up in the TV industry, it's
well that
unfortunately while I've had people, producers who really wanted to do a good job, a good show. We put together good teams. Sometimes we've had there was one time where they were dictating to me, well, who could be on, the kind of people to be on the team. So number one, I had to have a hot babe. That's number one. Fortunately, I had a student who actually was a former model.
Okay.
The psychic had to be under 25 and blonde and really pretty. It's like, where am I going to find somebody who's pretty, under 25, who is an experienced psychic? Experience, right? They wanted, my camera guy, the guy was really my tech guy. He's black, so we had that part of things covered.
Okay.
Now, it's like we were hitting all the notes except for the psychic part. I was working with 2 of the best psychics in the world. No, they weren't young or pretty enough. So they went with another team. They went with another team who was the guy's wife was, under 25, a sensitive. They didn't go with the show because it sucked. She couldn't pick anything up. She couldn't do anything. So those are the kinds of things that television dictates that, don't really work.
Lloyd, you are so right. I mean, reality TV is not reality. And also Zandine, if you look at Loyd Auerbach's IMDb, you'll see that he's been on a lot of TV shows. And the reason
I did see that.
Yeah, the reason why they probably cut him out is because Lloyd's going to throw down the truth. And they don't want that. They want drama. They want this fake drama. I mean, I worked on a TV show, and I'm not going to tell you which one it was, but the EVP that I got like 1 week before the before the filming of this show, they used my EVP and said, "Oh, we got this." No, they didn't. I got it, and so there's just so much BS, and I mean, when I
talk to my students about reality TV, I give the example of Real Housewives. They often have arguments, like really loud arguments. I can guarantee that some of those arguments may have started out as minor arguments, and the director said, "Ooh, let's do that again, but make it bigger." So, in other words, now they have to recreate.
Well, Lloyd, you're so correct. Because although I didn't do reality, I did like sitcoms, and I remember I would come in and do it. Like I was on WKRP in Cincinnati.
Oh, cool.
I would come in, and they had me play as like this young kid from the ghetto. So I'm coming there talking about blues, and then it's a white guy that's saying, "Hey, where does it say you have to be somebody black to enjoy blues?" He said, "If you want to enjoy Engelbert Humperdinck or who else said be my guest." But here's the thing, that scene was shot like that. And he says, "No, I want to do that better." Now, us being inexperienced, we didn't know what he's going to do or do to us. But what he did was, he said, "Let's do that over." So he shot it again. He goes, "Where does it say you have to be black to dig hip hop?" So then he does this Michael Jackson kick, and he starts beatboxing. So he steals all the energy and everything. And we were going along with the beatbox, but we didn't realize he took that scene to him. He just edited, and it was all just about, it wasn't even in the script or anything. It was just about getting the most juice that you can get. And that's all they do,
Yeah.
And they'll do it to you. They'll do it right to you. Like if you let them do it to you, they'll moves will get pulled on you, get X'd out. It's treacherous.
Yeah, it's the fact is that these shows that are unscripted, so that the Writers Guild is not involved in them, which is part of it. They are directed and they are edited, and you never know how they're going to edit it. I've been edited badly sometimes. It happens. Not necessarily maliciously, although if you look at some of the release forms that are now being circulated for reality TV, there are shows I've turned down because I refuse to sign the release form as it reads. And they won't let, and when I edit because you can cross stuff out on any release form.
Yeah.
And my uncle Larry was actually on the Directors Guild board for a little while, so it's like he's advised me on. So is my lawyer, but they don't want to have me on if I'm not going to agree to an understanding that they could, with malice, in other words, intentionally defame me, make me look terrible. It's like, why the hell would anybody sign something like that?
Exactly.
That's what William Tell said. William Tell said it. Yeah, sorry about that. Paul, tell them about William Tell, our guest we had, and how they tried to violate him. He kept saying, hey, don't violate me just for some ratings, because he knew.
Yeah. Zandine, I'm gonna let you tell that one part, but I gotta tell Lloyd, I got contacted, and you probably got contacted by the same company, but they wanted paranormal investigators to investigate naked. And I go,
naked paranormal. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some of my investigators they go, let's do it, Paul, let's do it. I go, no. I said that's bad publicity. It's not worth it. No, don't.
There's that show called Naked and Afraid,
Naked and Afraid.
Yeah, there's a couple of those shows out there, and Naked Paranormal, they talk to me about who might be a good person. It's like, I'm not gonna work with you. It's like, I'd rather, you want to do a show? Let's get a bunch of comedians together and do ghost hunting.
Exactly.
Yeah,
all they want is ratings. That's all they want. Yeah. I mean, and there's one TV show, again, I'm not going to mention any names, but everything is a freaking demon. That's a bunch of BS. Is a bunch of BS. Zandine, now, I know you were saying something. Go ahead.
Phil, do you remember what he was saying? I'm sorry. What William Tell was saying?
Well, no, not off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Yeah. He was just talking about that. He told the directors that certain things would get him to violate his probation, and like he saw some of the scenes, and he said, "Hey, if you get me to violate, me and you're gonna, we're gonna have a problem."
Oh, you're talking about breaking the lock. Breaking the lock.
But ratings,
His name wasn't William. It was William Steele.
Not William. I keep saying William. I mean William Steele. Yes, we're roommate to inmate.
He was inmate's roommate, and the director told him to break into this house that he was locked out of, and he was on probation, and he was a locksmith, so he could have easily done it, but he would have violated probation on camera.
Right.
Yes. So.
Yeah, they'll do whatever they can do to juice up the show, and they don't really care about you. One of the things that I usually run into arguments with, that sometimes they want a non-disclosure also for the show. And there was one I got from one of the networks where the non-disclosure clause in the release was that I could never talk about the show or having been on the show without their permission. I could never say anything negative about the show, my experience on the show, or the network. Which was like, I'm not going to sign this. I usually change it to, okay, I won't say anything negative about the show or even talk about the show until the episode airs, but I'm not going to, if you guys screw me over, I want to have to be able to talk about that. And the idea of not saying that, so there's another show on the network that I hate. I can't say that I hate the show. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. But they have lawyers. They have big lawyers with lots of money. So people should never, ever, ever sign those things without changing them, without altering them. Unless you really want to be on TV, in which case you can be on TV and never talk about it. How's
that? Pay for your own fame, huh? Pay for your own fame.
Yeah. Well, some people are desperate for fame. And when I worked with Penn and Teller on the Apocalypse, They wanted me to say that the world was going to end in 2012. I refused. They kept on pushing it and pushing it. And it was so funny is they were putting their cameras down, and we were in Mexico. They were putting their cameras down, and I looked at them. I go, and the world's ending in 2012. And they were like picking up their cameras, but they didn't catch me saying it.
Well, that's good. That's good.
I'm sorry, Zandy. Go ahead.
The world is ending in 2012.
You can upset, Lord. I got a real good question for you. Do you think, and feel sorry for hogging the mic on this one. Do you think there'll ever be a character as great as Superman, or Superman to just keep going to, till whenever? Do you think one will happen?
I think that's, Superman is an icon. There are certain mythological figures we have in all cultures. Superman is recognized around the world. Tarzan of the Apes is recognized all over the world. There are certain people in literature that are recognized no matter what culture it is, because the books have been translated into every language possible. Batman will always be an icon, and Wonder Woman to some extent, not as much as the other two, but those are characters that are absolutely going to be seen. I'd say probably Spider-Man also, and possibly the Hulk.
Funny you say that. Okay.
But I don't know that most of the Marvel characters are recognizable outside of, the English-speaking world, or some places where the comics or where the movies have actually made it to some extent.
Okay.
But there's always, it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with the next Superman movie. So,
Henry Cavill, which fan are you? Who do you like playing? Reed, Cavill, who do you like the best Superman? George Reeves.
I really wasn't a fan of the way they handled Superman with Henry Cavill. I think he could have done a great job if it had been written more like the character of comics.
Cool.
But Christopher Reeve kind of sets the stage in so many ways for that character in many, many ways. But frankly, I think of Tom Welling, who did Smallville. I know he never wanted to put on the suit.
I like that a lot.
I know he didn't want to put on the suit, but he should have been the one who took over the mantle at that point.
I agree.
Hey, Lloyd, on my Facebook, two of my friends is Brian Paluto, who does Lady Death, and Michael Linsner, who does Dawn. Yeah. Fantastic artists.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a big Marvel fan. And also, too, I love the independents, because I had one independent comic book called The Legendary Dark Silhouette. Do you have any independent favorites?
Well, definitely. I knew Dave Stevens, so The Rocketeer is a major favorite for me.
Oh, okay.
Trying to think of who else on the independents. Well, it depends on what you call it. Depends on what you call an independent in some respect. I think Tim Truman did a lot of good stuff with Grimjack and
Grimjack, yeah.
And Mike Grell, because Mike Grell did stuff for the major companies as well. But I love Mike Grell's artwork as well. And of course, some of the older comics by Frank Frazetta and Al Williamson and some of those other guys. And almost anything Mike Kaluta does. And Kaluta's actually in one of the shadow groups on Facebook. So he posts every once in a while. There's some good people. Michael Uslan, who has been running the DC stuff since since before Tim Burton's Batman. He's been an executive producer. He's also in that group as well, the Facebook group. So not an artist, but there's plenty of other good artists. I'm a fan of fantasy of Frazetta and Boris Vallejo and Michael Whelan and definitely Kaluta. In fact, I have a Kaluta Shadows on my wall over here, along with a Steranko Green Hornet. So
that is so cool. That is so cool.
Hey, Lloyd, I want to really thank you for coming on tonight.
Sure.
We're already gone past the normal hour we do, but I feel like we could probably keep you out here all night, but I'm sure you have a life. And when we get back,
man, it's loaded with information.
Thank
you. Lloyd, you were fantastic. It was just so fun to interview you, and I hope we can do this again.
Absolutely. It was a fun discussion. It wasn't the usual discussion that I have. It was a really fun discussion. if you folks will look for my books on Amazon, contact me through you guys too. So,
yeah, we need a plug. We need a plug for Lloyd's books.
yeah, and I just want to let you know that I do an every other week Q&A on YouTube, a live Q&A.
Okay.
It's called Ask Professor Paranormal, and I think the next one's going to be I think on the 22nd of September, and then the beginning of October, and then I'll be skipping 2 weeks after that, so through the end of the year. So it's just simply youtube.com/@AskProfessorParanormal.
And Lloyd, when this is published, I'll make sure that
please let me know.
I send you the link. Yeah. And also too, it's registered with IMDb.
Thank you. Great. That's great.
Awesome. This is amazing.
Thank you again, sir. Truly appreciate your time tonight.
Sure.
And thank you,
talk about your father next time. Sorry about that, Phil.
Oh, no worries, Andy.
Lloyd's the man. Lloyd's the man.
All right, everybody. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.